This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something much quieter and much more dangerous. Because what happens when the rules still exist but no longer work? Not because they were overturned, not because they were repealed, but because someone powerful discovered they could ignore them. And nothing happened. For a long time, that defiance looked like noise, a violation here, a warning there, a consequence that never quite arrived, and slowly, almost politely, the system adapted, not to enforce itself, but to tolerate the breach. That is how institutions don't collapse. They thin out, they stretch, they learn to live with damage. If you're watching this, you can feel it already, that low-grade unease, the sense that something fundamental has shifted. Stay with me, because what broke wasn't dramatic. What broke was enforceability. And once that's gone, everything else becomes optional. And that's where this goes next. This is where people get it wrong. They look for villains. They look for motives. They look for personalities. But the system doesn't move on outrage. It moves on incentives, on limits, on what can still be enforced and what can't. Right now, the system is not controlled by law. It's controlled by tolerance, by how many violations can be absorbed before enforcement becomes impractical, by how expensive accountability becomes when the subject is powerful, wealthy, untouchable. Rules still exist. Orders are still written. Warnings are still issued. But enforcement has a cost. Political cost, security cost, institutional cost. And when that cost rises high enough, the system doesn't fail loudly. It hesitates. That hesitation becomes the new operating logic. Not justice, not innocence, but feasibility. What can we still do? What can we no longer make stick? That shift changes everything. Because once enforcement depends on convenience, power starts setting the terms. And that didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly. Which brings us to how this started. Before this moment, there was a baseline. Not a golden age, not perfection, but a shared expectation. Court orders mattered. Warnings meant something. Escalation had an endpoint. Before, defiance was rare. And when it happened, it was short-lived because the cost was immediate. Now compare that to what's normal. Repeated violations, public ones, documented ones. And instead of resolution, there's accommodation. Extra hearings, careful language, incremental penalties that everyone knows won't work. This didn't feel like collapse while it was happening. It felt like procedure. Slow change always does. Each violation reframed as an exception. Each exception defended as prudence. Each delay justified as stability. And over time, enforcement stopped being automatic. It became negotiable. That's the shift most people missed, because nothing exploded. No single order ended the system. The rules didn't disappear. They stayed on the page. They just stopped landing. And once a system teaches itself to absorb defiance, it teaches everyone else the same lesson, which is why the next moment wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. Then came the moment that made the abstraction visible. Not a headline, not a speech, a collision. A formal order was issued, clear, specific, non-negotiable, and it was ignored. Not quietly, not ambiguously, but repeatedly, publicly, with documentation. What mattered wasn't the defiance itself. Systems survive violations all the time. What mattered was what followed. Warnings were issued, they were acknowledged. They were violated again. Penalties arrived, they were absorbed. Written off as noise. Hearings were scheduled, transcripts were created, records stacked up, and still nothing changed. That's when the system revealed its weakness, because escalation requires leverage, and leverage only works if consequences still hurt. This wasn't chaos, it was procedure grinding in place. Every step was lawful, every response correct, and yet the outcome was paralysis. That's the danger signal most people miss. When a system does everything right and still can't stop the behavior. Because when enforcement fails this visibly, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. And that's where this stopped being theoretical. At this point, the mechanism became impossible to ignore. Courts are not designed to overpower. They are designed to compel compliance. They assume something critical, that defiance is irrational, that consequences deter. But when the subject is insulated by money, by followers, by political gravity, those assumptions break. Fines stop being punishment. They become fees. Contempt stops being coercive. It becomes theater. Warnings stop escalating. They loop. And here's the hidden transfer that happens next. The cost doesn't disappear, it moves. From the defiant actor to the institution itself, every ignored order weakens the court's authority. Every delayed response signals uncertainty. Every accommodation teaches future defendants what's possible. Who benefits is obvious. The one who keeps acting, who absorbs the damage, is quieter. Judges, clerks, jurors, the idea that rulings mean something. This is how power learns the system's ceiling. Not by overthrowing it, by leaning on it until it bends around them. And once that ceiling is discovered, the next move is never restraint. It's escalation. The tempo changes here, because once the ceiling is found, pressure accelerates. Violations cluster, spacing collapses, what used to be occasional becomes constant. Posts, contacts, signals sent in public, not subtle, not accidental, each one daring the system to do something it's already shown it can't easily do. The response speeds up too. Emergency hearings, stacked records, language hardening. You can feel the strain in the process. Shorter timelines, sharper phrases, less patience. This is no longer about compliance. It's about containment. Because when defiance goes public, it stops being a courtroom problem. It becomes a social one. Followers watch, allies test limits, opponents brace. The system is now reacting in real time to behavior designed to stay one step ahead of consequence. And here's the critical turn. Every new act meant to show strength actually increases exposure. Each escalation creates more evidence, more documentation, more gravity. The trap snaps shut slowly, not with force, with accumulation. At this speed, there is no neutral outcome, only convergence. And the damage is no longer abstract, because this is where it reaches you. This is the point where it stops being theoretical, because enforcement isn't an abstract concept to you. It's the reason rules feel real. You rely on it without noticing. When contracts hold, when verdicts stick, when threats stay rhetorical, when that weakens, the impact isn't dramatic at first. It's subtle, delayed. You see it in hesitation, in institutions double-checking themselves, in officials choosing safety over certainty. You feel it when timelines stretch, when accountability feels optional, when power seems louder than process. And there's something else, something harder to name. When authority stops landing at the top, pressure moves downward, onto workers, onto bystanders, onto people who didn't volunteer for this stress. Security increases, streets close, rhetoric sharpens. You didn't change, the system did, and now you're living inside its adaptation. If this feels unsettling, it should, because once enforcement becomes selective, nobody knows where the line actually is. And uncertainty is the most corrosive force a system can absorb. Stay with me, because this doesn't stay contained inside one country. Once enforcement weakens at the center, it doesn't stay domestic. Other systems notice. Allies watch for continuity, for predictability, for whether commitments still bind. Adversaries watch for hesitation, for internal distraction, for moments when attention turns inward. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition. Instability creates openings. Markets react before politicians do. Capital moves faster than constitutions. When authority looks contested, risk premiums rise. Decisions stall, confidence thins, diplomacy slows because nobody knows who will still be standing on the other end 6 months from now. And that uncertainty compounds. Trade, security, coordination. What used to be a local breakdown becomes a signal event. Not because anyone planned it, but because systems mirror each other. When enforcement fails visibly in one place, every connected system recalibrates. Some hedge, some pull back, some probe. The world doesn't wait for resolution. It adjusts in real time. And here's the uncomfortable part. Once that adjustment begins, it's very hard to reverse, because trust, once discounted, demands proof to return, which means whatever comes next will not unfold at normal speed. It will accelerate, and that forces a choice. From here, the system only has a few directions it can move, not outcomes. Paths. The first is adjustment. Institutions adapt just enough to survive. New guardrails, faster escalation, authority reasserted through redesign rather than confrontation. It looks calm on the surface, but it comes at a cost. More surveillance, more security, less tolerance for ambiguity. The second path is erosion. The rules remain, the language stays intact, but enforcement becomes uneven, conditional, dependent on status. Nothing breaks all at once, it just stops working reliably. People learn when to comply and when to test limits. The system continues, hollowed. Then there's rupture. That's when parallel realities form, one claiming legitimacy, another rejecting it. Orders are issued. Defiance answers back. At that point, authority isn't argued. It's contested, not symbolically, operationally. I'm not telling you which path we're on, because systems don't announce it. They drift, they slide, they accelerate only after enough weight has been added. What matters now is that all three paths are open at once, and the next moves will narrow them. Fast. Nothing about this ends cleanly, because systems that lose enforceability don't collapse on schedule. They linger, they strain, they demand constant attention. What you're watching now isn't resolution, it's exposure. Exposure of where authority still works and where it doesn't. That distinction will shape everything that follows. Who feels protected, who feels expendable, who decides to comply, and who decides to test the edge. There is no comforting lesson here, no guarantee that process wins, only the reality that once enforceability is questioned, every action becomes a signal. Some people will look away, some will normalize the tension, some will treat this as just another news cycle. That's how the danger deepens, because systems don't fail when people panic. They fail when people adjust. If you want to understand what happens next, you can't stop at the event. You have to follow the mechanism. Stay with this. Watch what gets enforced. Watch what doesn't. Because the future doesn't arrive with an announcement. It arrives through precedent. And the precedents are being written now.